And I wonder how many of us have an answer here. And the question is, first I'll ask this, what is identity? Yes, good question. There are many kinds, but what is it?
Personality.
To some degree, personality, he says. Anyone else? What do you think identity is?
Differentiation.
Uniqueness? Yeah. ID, okay. I get that. Who else? It's who you are. So who are you? It's another question, right? But no, just thinking about it, right? Anyone else? Yeah? Okay, I know it's an interesting one. But yeah, the question, the real question around identity is, who are you? Who are you? And it's a long one, okay? Because how do you answer that question? Where do you start? Okay? Where do you start? And I think today we are going to lay the foundation. I can foresee that this will not be a one session discussion because it's so deep and detailed. But today I just want us to seek to define identity. Okay? And if we can define identity, then next time we can talk about other things like identity crisis and forgetting your identity, realizing your identity. All these are things that you can touch on identity, but if you don't know what identity is, how can you remember who you are if you didn't know who you are in the first place? Do you understand? You know how in movies, like when Simba dies and then Mufasa appears in the sky, like, remember who you are. So, but it must have been then that Simba at some point tackled the question of identity, and Simba knows who he was and he forgot who he was, so he had to be reminded, you know. So it's interesting when you look at yourself and you say, does that apply to you? Can you say remember who you are? In some cases yes, in some cases no, because some people have never discovered who they are. Okay, so yeah, that also should be the next slide. So true identity, because there's many types of identity. If you look online, they'll tell you there is personal identity, there's social identity, there's public identity. These are different aspects of you and different ways that you show up, okay? But there's also cultural identity. Some people identify a lot with their culture, okay? Not some people, everyone identifies with their culture to some extent. There is legal identity, like are you here on a work permit, student visa? All these are still types of identities, right? There's digital identity. There are some keyboard warriors who are very different in person than they are online, you know, like, you know, you're texting someone and their digital identity completely different from who you meet in person. We have professional identity. We know each other here socially and in this manner, but I don't know you as a professional. You understand? There's that side of you as well. There's gender identity, okay? There's psychological identity, there is physical identity, there is philosophical identity. Basically, for everything that you relate with, there is an identity, okay? So identity is a really broad subject. Are we agreed up to that point? Yeah. Right? And just to say, so sometimes when they define it, they limit it to the things that we say, personality, experiences, memories, okay? But that's not the fullness of your identity. These are components in your identity, okay? And so I want us in the first section to define identity a little bit, look at the etymology of the word, where it came from, because I feel like sometimes, you know, words change meaning through time. But when you look at what a word meant in the beginning, it can also give you a clear picture of what identity is. So let's go to the next slide. So personal identity. I picked this one because it's closely related to what you would call the true identity. The question of who am I, okay? Because if you answer that question from a professional perspective, you'll say, I am a data scientist. But like we said last time, that's not who you are, that's what you do. You understand? You can even define yourself sometimes by country. I'm a German. But is that all that you are? No, there is more to you. Do you understand? And so it's the issue of identity, it goes deep, Deeper, 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 and for everyone, there are different layers to them. But this is what personal identity refers to. It says it refers to the self-concept. Self-concept, a concept that you have of yourself, that an individual forms around their own uniqueness and personal traits, okay? So this is more like what we are familiar with when we talk about identity. And it says this includes aspects of their personality, life experiences, memories, values, beliefs, and choices, okay? So when you talk about identity, most people would resonate with this definition because, yeah, okay, it makes sense that I am who I am because of certain life experiences, certain memories I've had and all these things, and it makes up my personality. And although that's true, there is still a deeper layer to what identity is. And I think at this point is where many people are unable to dig deeper because they just feel like, either they don't have the resources to do that in terms of time and investment, or they just don't have the knowledge on how to explore this other part of them, okay? When we look at the etymology of the word, that means how the word came to be the way we use it today. It says here, in the mid-16th century, it says it's in the sense, quality of being identical. No, even though identity and identical, in today's words, they seem like opposites, right? Because in one sense, you're talking about uniqueness, in another sense, you're talking about similarity, but the words seem to have the same root. Do you understand? So it says here that it's in a sense it's the quality of being identical, and from French it says that the word would be identitas, and from Latin it would be idem, which means the same. Now the word identity comes from the Latin word identitas, which I've just read, which means sameness. Okay? Identity comes from identity, the identitas, and it means sameness or the ability to be like something, which is interesting, okay? And it is also derived from idem, which means the same, okay? And it is the suffix, and when you add the suffix tas, it says it indicates a state or condition. And it says the concept of identity thus originally referred to the quality of being the same or the condition of being identical to something or someone else. Now I find that very fascinating. That identity refers to the quality of being the same, similar to something or someone else. Isn't that strange? It's very strange, right? But let's see where that will lead us. I want us to do a short exercise, and I want you to go 5 years back in your mind, okay? 5 years back. 5 years ago, there are accomplishments that you did not have that you have today, okay? Right? That you have added to your identity. But 5 years ago, they were not there. Maybe 5 years ago, you didn't have a career, you're a student, okay? Maybe 5 years ago, you are not resident in Ireland, so this was not part of your identity. Maybe 5 years ago, there's many ways we can play this, right? But just 5 years ago, you were somewhere, and you still had an identity, okay? Okay, take it back 5 years more. That's 10 years. There's still some things that you accomplished in that 5 years that you did not have 10 years ago. But the question is, did you still have an identity? Okay, let's go 15 years back, and 20 years back, and 25 years back, and 30 years back, till the day you were born. And I would ask you the question, did you have an identity? Because if identity is only memories, experiences, culture, nationality, then what happened to you? Who are you when you showed up on earth? Did you have an identity? Okay? So most of you are nodding yes, even though you might not be able to explain why, but you know that you had an identity. And that tells you that identity does not just stop at personality, because all these things you developed along the way, but on the basis of a certain foundation, on true identity. Are we together? I feel like that landed for most people, so that's good. So I can continue, right? So, as we begin to explore this concept of identity and to see, according to this definition, what are we like? You understand? Because the the most common definition of identity is who we are based on life experiences, memories, values, beliefs, and choices. As a one-day-old baby, you had none of that, right? At least not in this world, okay? But when you come to the second definition, it explains it so well, and it says it's the quality of being similar to something and to someone. So, in your first days on earth, where did you get an identity from? Do you understand? Do you understand where we're going with this? Like, who was your identity? What gave you an identity? Because you all agree that you had one. If you did not have an identity, that means you are insignificant, you are nothing, and that's not true. Do you understand? Okay, so, yeah, the exercise is done. You can stop rewinding. Come back to 2024. Speaking on identity, the question there is, where do we start or where do I begin? Where do I begin? I wrote down some thoughts concerning identity, and I think they're interesting, okay? And so they're different. This is more summarized than this, but let me read with you so that we can move together. It says here that for you to understand or even to start speaking of identity, you need to appreciate that you need recognition. Okay? You know, some people say things like, oh, I don't need anyone. I'm okay on my own. There is no such thing as identity in a vacuum. Identity only exists in the midst of other identities. Okay? So there is a need for recognition. There is a need for something or someone to recognize who you are, and that forms part of your identity. Okay, are we together? This is going to be probably a long thought process, but just follow with me. And so it says identity begins with a need for acknowledgement, and we seek someone outside of ourselves to confirm who we are. It's not strange, it's not weak, it's part of our nature as social beings, okay? We need recognition. We also need validation from others. We rely on love and approval and esteem of those that we respect, okay? And our sense of self requires validation from a source that we deem praiseworthy. Now, what that means is you need validation, but not just from anything and anyone, but people or things that you think matter. If you get validation from things that you do not consider meaningful, then the validation does not count. So it matters where your validation comes from, okay? And this is for everyone. So it doesn't mean when you say you need validation, you're weak. No, it's part of being a human and walking this journey. Now, the problem comes in when the sources of your recognition and validation are volatile. Okay? Because you need recognition and validation to form an identity. But if these sources are unstable, then that creates a threat for your identity. So there are limits to human approval. Human affirmation is inherently unstable. I can be happy with you today and not very happy with you tomorrow. And if your identity is based on the strength of that validation and recognition, then my identity will fluctuate based on how we relate. People can let us down or change their opinions based on our performance. It says, and this fickleness can leave our identity on shaky ground. Do you understand? I know many people can relate with this. And so, even though we need recognition and validation, it's important to recognize early enough that human approval and recognition has its limits. And for so long as you're on this earth, people will disappoint you. People will let you down. Do you understand? But if your identity is anchored on something more stable, then it will not affect who you are. Okay? We're still going, all right? We're together. Someone said something like this. He said, the praise of the praiseworthy is above all rewards. If someone that you consider to be highly esteemed, important, if that person turns to you and says, good job, that affirmation goes longer than when some stranger comes and tells you good job. In fact, you might term that one as a creep and probably report them for harassment, right? But if it's someone that you value and then they turn to you and they affirm something in you, it says, the praise of the praiseworthy is above all rewards. It's so special because it confirms something in you. If you look at that thing so highly and that thing looks at you and says, good job, that person, I think, we're getting there. A person thing, don't get it twisted. Of course, things are not able to give us content, but I'm just trying to express that whatever it is that you consider praiseworthy, if it turns to you and tells you, hey, you're doing well, I'm proud of you, I love you, that is more precious than anything that you could buy. Okay? Now, if the person who says this to you is God, is Jesus, if the person who speaks these words to you is Jesus, and if your validation, if your recognition comes from that source, the difference between that source is that that source is stable. Okay? That source does not change. And so the advantage you have over the person whose validation is in their boyfriend is that the boyfriend might run away, but Jesus, he says, he is the friend who sticks closer than a brother. That means your identity is no longer at risk because it does not base itself on what is moving, okay? And these things are going to make sense. I'm just kind of setting the tone in a bit. I like how it says in Isaiah 43:1. I don't have it here. Can anyone read for us Isaiah 43:1 as I continue? But even as someone finds that, there is an importance in us resisting something called cultural captivity. What is that? It's when our identity is defined solely by our environment. Do you understand? You think that you will be happier or more accepted when you dress the certain way, or when you hang out with certain people, or when you do certain activities. And so what happens is you find yourself chasing after an identity. And if you're chasing after an identity, then it's not yours. Right? How can you chase after what is yours? Think about that for a second. So if you are trying to be something, then you're probably not it. Okay? Now, I'm not talking about self-improvement and I'm trying to lose a few pounds. No. That's still not who you are. I'm just talking about if you're trying to change yourself, because I hear some ladies say, they're so fascinated with a celebrity like Beyonce, and they try to be that person. They try to be that person, but it doesn't work because they are not that person. You understand? So when you're chasing after an identity, then you must first stand and realize that maybe that's not who you are. Okay? So we must resist this thing called cultural captivity, that it seeks to put you in certain confines of who you are. And you'll notice it changes, because what is acceptable 5 years ago is not acceptable 10 years ago. It's not acceptable 20 years ago. It changes. So you'll notice if that's your identity, it will also change. Do you understand? But not because of any enlightenment or revelation, just because things are changing, you'll also change with them. Okay? So these people often find themselves dissatisfied, unhappy, and also unstable. Okay? Because their identity is not secure. All right? How much have we gone up there through? There's something I wanted to touch on, imagination, but I don't know if it's too early. But because we really haven't explained some things that I wanted to touch on concerning identity. But here's the thing. Our imagination plays such a central role in maintaining our identity once we realize who we are. Okay? Once you understand who you are, your imagination plays such a central role in reminding you and keeping you at the same place. Do you get what I'm saying? When we face challenges, through our identity, from the culture, from things, we can use our imagination to remember, to affirm, to convince ourselves of who we are because we already know it. Okay? So we can see ourselves as loved. We can see ourselves as accepted. We can see ourselves as blessed because that's the truth. Do you understand? And that's who we really are. Okay. Let's go to the next one. I think it's the gold standard. And I want you to pay attention here. This will be interesting. So, how many of us know what the gold standard is? Yes. You work in finance? Okay. Woo. Okay, I need to take out notes, right? I can't lie now. No, I'm just kidding. So the gold system, the gold system is a monetary system that existed. I don't know if there are any countries that still use it, but it was there a few years ago. And now it's replaced by something called the fiat system, which is that the money that we have gains its value based on the government's authority, policies, and all of these things, right? And I mean, even just from that definition, you'll see that if I ask you what's more stable, the gold standard of fiat, what do you think is more stable?
Gold.
Why? I just explained that fiat is the currency that most governments have now that is based on government policy and these things. So they determine the value of...
The value comes from the government telling you it's valuable. It's nothing being tangibly backed by it. It's like your euros. We accept euros because the government tells us to accept euros.
Yeah. What he said. But it's true, right? He's absolutely correct, right? That the money that we have intrinsically has no value, except that we are told this is 20, this is 10. Okay? And that's why in certain countries in Africa, we've seen interesting things happen where, heads of state have printed money. Do you understand? But if you can print money, then does the money have value? You understand? And what happens after they print money? The value of the currency drops. How? I thought more money means... But yeah, maybe you can explain that later, not now. But at least if you have any questions on finances, you know who to see. I'm still on the subject of identity here. So on the gold standard, that money or the value of currency was based on a fixed unit of gold. Okay? So if they say that 10 euros can buy 1 ounce of gold, then the government needs to have enough gold in their reserves to match the amount of money or currency that's in circulation, because it means at any one point, anyone can give 10 euros and get back 1 ounce of gold. So it's a very steady system. You understand? It's not based on factors that are variable, because now someone can change their mind and the currency can depreciate or appreciate. Do you understand? But that was based on precious metals. Okay? And these things, or rather this concept, it teaches us something so important about identity. Because if we're looking at the gold standard, it means that if you have 20 euros, that 20 euros represents something in gold. Do you understand? That the money is actually worth something. Whereas in the fiat concept, the money is worth nothing. And so it's kind of floating. Yes, we use it to exchange, but it actually has no value. And you know, I find this to be a difference in the world and between people. That there are people who, because of their understanding of their identity, they behave like, fiat currency. But for those who understand their true identity, it becomes like you are backed up by something of value. Do you understand? That you represent something of value. And that's why I said, no one is useless. No one was born for nothing. Because their value comes from something that's not them. Okay? And so we're going to talk about like some of the characteristics there. But I use the word intrinsic, inherent worth. Okay? Because no one has intrinsic value. No one has value in and of themselves. We have inherent value, and that inherent value gives us intrinsic value. Are we together? Do you understand? Because remember, what is identity? We describe identity as the quality of being similar to something, contrary to what we know. But it's the quality of being similar to something. So if you are similar to something, and that's identity, then that thing makes you who you are or gives value to who you are. Okay? I hope we are still pushing on in the same direction. So I'm going to read some things here. It says, the gold standard is a monetary system in which a country's currency is pegged to the value of gold. And it says the currency is valuable because it is a representation of something valuable. The money means something because there is gold that backs it up. Where there is no gold, the money is worth nothing. It's just paper. Okay? Similarly, if we apply this metaphor to identity and the divine, one might say that just as money derives its value from gold, human identity derives its value from being made in the image of God. Do you remember what we read in Genesis chapter 1? Verse 26, what does it say? It says, then God said, let us make mankind in our own image, in our likeness, so that they may rule over the fish of the sea and the birds of the sky, over the livestock and the wild animals, over all creatures that move around. And he says, so God created mankind in his own image. Do you understand? That we carry an image of the Creator, and that's our value. Do you understand? We are like notes and denominations, but God is what backs us up. Do you understand what I'm saying? He is what... See, we did the exercise of rewinding back. And you went back to day one of you being on earth. And you still said that you had an identity. Where did the identity come from? Do you understand? That sense of being a person, even before you had a name, that's what Genesis 1:26 is talking about. Being made in the image and the likeness of God. Okay? And it says this isn't intrinsic value based on physical or temporal attributes. It says, but on a spiritual and eternal standard established by God. The reason why you are valuable is not because you dress nice. It's not because you talk nice. It's not because you come from a certain country. The reason why you are valuable is because God, you are made in the very image and likeness of God, and his eternal nature is in you. Do you understand? Okay? Still laying down the foundation of identity. Because identity is not solely a social construct, which is what many people think it is. People think identity is just about how you present, your uniqueness, your preferences, but it's more than that. Okay? Because there's something that backs you up. Even before you form memories, achieve accolades, before you're promoted, there's something that backs you up. There's something that makes you who you are before the addition of memories, experiences, and all the things that you add and will continue to add. Those are components that add to your identity, but your identity is back to something greater, and that's God. Okay? Are we together? So, it says identity is not so solely a social construct or an individualistic expression. It's not only that. It is that, but it's not only that. It says it's but a given status that has inherent value and dignity because of its divine backing. Everyone is precious. Everyone is important. Even those who do bad things, most of them do them because they don't know who they are. They haven't come, many people who do bad things, they are going through a perpetual identity crisis. They are trying to find themselves in the wrong places all the time. But if they were to reconcile who they really were, half the problems we had wouldn't exist. You understand? People do. Have you ever heard of the things that people do when they go through identity crisis? They break families. They destroy nations. They kill. They do all sorts of things because they are confused about who they are. And how come that even the wealthiest of them all, in their bid for everything that money can buy, they still cannot buy confidence in who they are. They still try to prove themselves by doing that and doing this. You know, insecurity, jealousy, these are all traits of issues with your identity. Identity is a very interesting subject because you'll find that you're okay so long as you're not compared to someone else. Do you understand? Once you're compared to someone else with similar skills, then jealousy creeps in. Why? Because your identity is not secure. It could be secure to what you are doing, and you feel like you're the best in that field, and so that gives you value. But the moment someone else steps in and they can do better, then insecurities begin. So were you really secure in the first place, or was there just an absence of situations that would bring up the insecurities? Do you see? So identity is a deep subject. I can see that. But I know that as we continue to discuss, many of us will realize who we really are, and it will answer so many questions that we have. It says it's a perspective that sees human identity as having a sacred dimension, grounded in spirituality, and connected to the eternal source. Connected to the eternal source. Okay, let's go. I have some characteristics of the gold standard and how it relates. I don't know how much time we have. Huh? We don't. Okay, we'll go quickly. Like I said, intrinsic, inherent. Not just intrinsic. Because we all need validation and recognition. So you cannot have worth of yourself. Do you understand? That's why money, currency, needed gold to give it worth. So its value was inherent. You understand? People know that they can take the money because it's worth something in gold. So our value is similar. We have intrinsic and inherent worth. And you know what? The value of the currency will always, let me say this, the gold will always be greater in value than the currency which it is backing up. Do you understand? So you cannot be backed up by something inferior to you. Do you understand what I'm saying? You cannot even be backed up by something similar to you. You can only be backed up by something stronger, something greater, something stable, something that has more. So you can derive your value from it. So it says here, it's intrinsic, it's inherent. Just as currency has inherent value from gold, humans have intrinsic inherent worth because they are created in the image of God. Okay? This is still talking about identity. That you are valuable. It's the first thing you need to remember. You are worth something. You're not worthless. You're not useless. You didn't come in this world for nothing. It doesn't matter what you are experiencing, because your value does not come from your circumstances. It comes from your source. Okay? So sometimes we go through things and they shake our identity, but you need to remember that you are worth so much more than whatever is before your eyes. Okay? Okay, Nomvula? Immutable value, meaning unchanging. It does not change. Your value does not change. Sometimes we feel like it does. Because maybe you felt more relevant at some point. Maybe in your former job or in your former country, you felt like you had a certain position that contributed to your identity. But just because situations have changed, doesn't mean that your value has changed. You are still as valuable today as you ever will be, as you ever were. Your value is consistent. Do you understand? It does not fluctuate. And people need to remember this, because people whose identity is based on their performance are bound to live a very, very volatile life. Happiness will always elude you because things are always changing. So if your identity is in your... I'm not saying don't perform well. I'm not saying don't strive for success. But that cannot be your identity. You understand? It says here that human identity has an unchanging value given by God, akin to the enduring value of gold. It says of Jesus Christ in Hebrews 13:8, it says Jesus Christ is the same yesterday, today, and forever. What does that mean? He does not change. Doesn't change his mind, doesn't change his opinion over you, doesn't change his emotions about you. That's why you can trust and put your identity in him. Do you understand? And I like how it says Jesus Christ does not change yesterday, today, or forever. But it says in 1 John 4, it says, as he is, so are we in this world. So if Jesus does not change yesterday, today, and forever, as he is, so are we in this world. That means the same level of immutability in terms of value is the same level of immutability we have. You might be going through things that demean your value, but that's only perceived. Your true value coming from God cannot depreciate. You understand? These are things you need to remember when you're talking about identity. Redeemed identity. Redemption through Christ is compared to a valuable backing of currency. It provides a precious foundation for identity. What does it say here? It says, for you know that it is not with perishable things such as silver or gold that you are redeemed. I like that because it even includes gold in this. It calls silver and gold, which we know are very permanent, it calls them perishable. Meaning that our redemption is more permanent than any physical thing that exists. Do you understand? It says here, for you know that it was not with perishable things such as gold or silver that you are redeemed from the empty way of life handed down to you from your ancestors. But it says, but with the precious blood of Christ, a lamb without blemish or defect. The value of Christ's sacrifice for you exceeds any earthly thing that you can try to peg your identity to. There is not one thing that can give you more secure identity than the one that God gave you. I would like to tell you to try, but I don't want to waste your time because it doesn't exist. But you can try. A durable foundation. It says building life on the teachings of Jesus is like building on a solid rock, stable and enduring. It says paralleling gold's role in providing stability to money. We talked about what is the basis of your identity. And here Christ speaks of, in Matthew 7:27, he says, therefore, everyone who hears these words of mine and puts them in practice is like a wise man who built his house on the rock. He says, the rain came down, the streams rose, and the winds blew and beat against that house. Yet it did not fall because it had a foundation on the rock. This scripture is so interesting because it talks about life. Sometimes the wind blows and the rain rains. What does rain do? It rains, right? And things come against you. And the only reason you'll stand is not because of the house or because of your life. It's because of the foundation. Do you understand? Someone might have a bigger house than you, but if their foundation is in something weaker, ultimately, it will give in. But if your foundation is right, then you need not fear the winds and the rains and anything that might come at you. you'll always be secure in yourself, right? You know, sometimes when we work, we have jobs and all of these things. I've seen a certain pattern where people identify with the company that they work for. So much it becomes, it gets into their head, you know? Like, I'm first an employee of X before I'm even my mother's child, you know? Like, you are, and it's interesting because these companies, okay? These companies, they have learned, and listen, I'm not bad mouthing anyone, but they have learned a subtle way of kind of implanting the idea and the culture to esteem the company above everything else, right? And that's why sometimes you would be rewarded for working to the extent that your family, is not okay, but the opposite is not true. Like if you have to take care of your family, no one will say, oh, good job. No, it's always that you put in more here and it doesn't matter what breaks there. Do you understand? So if a person who's so attached to their work gets fired, do you know what happens to them? And I've seen it. Depression. Depression. There have been layoffs in Dublin over the past couple of months. I've seen it. Someone who was okay, seemingly, they're not okay anymore. Why? Because they lost their job. What does that tell you? That their identity was in something that's shakable. Okay? So it says a durable foundation. Anytime, examine yourself. Anytime you attribute something, your sense of self-worth, and you know God is going to bless you. He's going to cause you to become great. But even then, don't forget that that's not your identity. That doesn't make you who you are. That doesn't define you. Do you understand? Your identity must always be the source. Hey, I think I'm going to skip. Unique and valuable. Each person is uniquely made. We know this now because many of us look at identity from the unique perspective. Each person is unique, made by God, and holds unique value, just as a piece of gold is unique, yet valuable. You see, the country cannot hold one bar of gold and say the whole currency is based on this. Every bar of gold represents a certain amount of money. In other words, everyone is valuable, actually. Do you understand? Actually valuable. It says here, for you created me in my inmost being. You knit me together in my mother's womb. I praise you because it says, I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Your works are wonderful. And it says, my soul knows very well. My soul, it's beyond the mind. It says, my soul, I know that deep within, when I look at myself, the fact that I'm here, it cannot be because I have been so diligent. It's not because I've been so good. It's not because I've been so righteous. I must recognize that there's something backing me up that's greater than all my efforts combined. Purpose. Created with a purpose. That everyone was created to fulfill a particular function. It says here that, for we are God's handiwork. I read this verse last time, but that time I used a version that said, we are God's poetry, or we are God's masterpiece. Handiwork. You know, handiwork is the best that your hands can produce. It says, we are God's handiwork, created in Christ Jesus to do good works, which are prepared in advance for us to do. We are all created for a purpose. No one exists just to exist. Yes, sometimes people don't fulfill their purpose, but it doesn't mean their purpose does not exist. You understand? And my favorite, belonging. You know, everyone yearns to belong. Some of you came here because you wanted and you were looking for some place to belong. You tried this and it didn't work, and you tried that and it didn't work. There is an innate desire for us to be attached to something, someone, okay? And I know they teach about detachment and all those things, and I see where they're coming from. But everyone needs to belong. That's why he set everyone in families. Okay? In Matthew 22, verse 20-21, which is a very interesting story. I might not read it all. the Pharisees asked Jesus, should we pay taxes to Caesar? They didn't ask him because they were curious. They were asking him so that they can trap him. Okay? And he said, yes. He said, bring me a coin. And they brought him a coin. And he said, whose image is here? And the person's image that was there was Caesar. Okay? The Bible is also historical. If you believe in Julius Caesar and Alexander the Great, and you question the existence of Jesus, that's interesting. But anyway, he says, whose image is on this coin? They said what? Caesar. And he answered them and he says, give to Caesar what belongs to Caesar. But he didn't end there. He says, and to God what belongs to God. What did he mean? Pay your taxes. Because you see on your money, it belongs to the government, right? But give to God what belongs to God. Is he talking about money? No. He's talking about who? You. Why? Because you are created in the image and likeness of. So the coin was created in the image and likeness of Caesar. So yeah. But you give yourself to God because you are created in the image and likeness of God. Do you understand? And so people face this crisis because they don't know where they belong. If you can attach yourself, if you can see that you belong in the hands of the Father, then you will never have to feel lost. You never have to feel like you don't belong. And the only reason you feel that is because you are in places that you don't belong. Okay? Next. How much time do we have? Mirrors and identity. What do you think we can learn? No, take it back. What do you think we can learn from mirrors about identity? Or what role do mirrors play in our identity? Now we're in the cosmetic field. We've left the finance.
Confirmation.
Huh?
Confirmation.
Confirmation. Oh, I like that. Confirmation. Basically, I'm asking you, what do you use your mirror for?
See yourself.
To see yourself. Do you think mirrors are important?
Yeah.
Why?
Because you see how the world sees you.
Yeah. Yes, Lawrence.
It's just so you can watch your face, and it's, I suppose if you've never seen your face, you don't wonder what you look like.
Exactly. Right? So we can all agree that mirrors are important. Okay? But can I also throw this spanner in the works? Does it matter what mirror you look at? Right? Let's look at a few examples of mirrors. Okay. So what happens when you look into a pool of water? Do you see your reflection? Can you use that as a mirror? Yes. Because you see yourself. It's a mirror. What's the problem though with a water mirror? It's not.
Depends on the clarity of the water.
It's not stable. If anything passes, the image you see will be distorted. So for the time that you look at it, it's okay. But if a boat passes, if a duck passes, then your image is what? Distorted. So that's interesting. So mirrors are important, but not just any mirror. How about shattered mirrors? What do they do to your image? Huh?
Show you multiple reflections of yourself.
They show you certain things that just don't look right, like your nose, like, because you're looking at a mirror. But listen, does it change who you are? But can it convince you about who you're not? And can you believe it? Sometimes, yes, right? Mirrors, okay? How about a convex mirror?
Shows you that you're loving it.
Yeah, it can pull your nose, right? I think a convex one is the one like when you're looking through a peephole and someone looks like, kind of like a fish eye lens, right? It can distort the image, but it's still a mirror. and it serves a purpose. How about a concave mirror?
It's the opposite. You're smiling.
Yeah, and you know, I want you to think about these things correct philosophically, because the convex will amplify your insecurities. My forehead is too big. I don't like my personality. You know, because you're looking at the wrong mirror. You look at the concave, and it diminishes your value. It tells you, oh, you're so small. Like, you can't amount to much. You can't do anything, okay? You look at the mirror in the water, and it's never the same. Do you understand? It changes. You look at the shattered mirror, and you're so conscious of the brokenness in your life. You understand? You don't see anything else other than what's broken. Can we go to the next one? How about a one-way mirror? Because many people live in this one. That they don't know that there is another side, another dimension. They only deal with what's right in front of them. They have no connection to the source. Do you understand? In a one-way mirror, you don't know that there's someone on the other side of the mirror looking at you. Do you understand? So, it doesn't distort your image, but it affects your consciousness in that you live unaware, as do many people on the streets. They are not conscious of who they are, where they come from, what their identity is. Correct? How about a tinted mirror? What can it do to you?
Color distortion.
Yeah, color distortion. It can dull your shine. It can show you who you are, but to a lesser degree. And you can believe that image, that I'm limited. How about the plain mirror? It shows you the real image of who you are. And that's why we have those in our houses. Because you don't want a mirror that's lying to you every morning. Okay? So mirrors do tell us something and do play a role in our identity. Okay? Can you play the next one? It says here in James 1:27, I might conclude here, I'm not sure. Let me check the time. But I want you to think about it. It says here, it says, don't just listen to the word of truth. I know you come every Wednesday and it's great. But it says, don't just listen and not respond. Do you understand? Don't just listen and not respond. It says, for that is the essence of self-deception. That you hear some things and you just let them pass by. You feel like, And he says, so always let his word become like poetry written and fulfilled by your life. If God says you are created in his image, if God says you're his masterpiece, let this be the philosophy that you employ, right? And he says, if you listen to the word and don't live out the message you hear, you become like a person who looks in the mirror of the word to discover the reflection of his face in the beginning. Okay, so you look at the mirror, you're like, nice. So imagine you look at yourself and you have like, I don't know, a grain of rice. And then you just walk away. That's weird, right? If you look at yourself and you see something that you can fix, what will you do? You'll fix it. So it's speaking metaphorically like this. And he says, you perceive how God sees you in the mirror of the word. I love how it says that. Because as you read the word, it tells you how God sees you. And you know what I've found? He never sees you in a negative light. Because you are made in his image and in his likeness. You might see yourself in a negative light. Others may see you in a negative light, but he doesn't see you that way. Do you understand? God sees the completeness and the perfection that you are. God will never appear to you and tell you, man, you're so dumb. If I was you, I wouldn't do it. No. He never tells you you're so inadequate. After all these years, don't you get it? He never tells you, man, you're doomed, you're not going anywhere. No. He doesn't speak like that. And if you've heard voices like that, I can guarantee you that's not God. He says, you perceive how God sees you in the mirror of the Word. That the Word acts like a mirror. You know, they say that literature is a mirror for the society, right? But the Word is your mirror. He says, then you go out and forget about your divine origin. That you read and then you don't remember who you are. You don't remember that you have intrinsic inherent worth. You don't remember that you belong. You don't remember that you have a foundation that cannot be shaken. You don't remember that your value is immutable. You don't remember that you're created for a purpose. And so you forget all the things that have to do with your identity, and you become just like the fiat currency that depends on government policy. And when someone changes their mind about you, it affects you so bad you cannot get up the next day. If that's your experience, then you need to remember what's the source of your identity. He says, but those who set their gaze deeply into the perfect law of liberty are fascinated, because the first thing that you will see as you encounter the Word is the marvelous nature of God's creation. And that's why the psalmist said here, I praise you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Your works are wonderful, and my soul knows very well. He took some time and just thought about it. And it's like, man, I can't say anything. Like, glory to God, you know? So it says that those who look into the perfect law are fascinated by and respond to the truth that they hear and are strengthened. That's another thing. As you read the Word, you become stronger, not just as a person, but also in your identity. You become more secure in who you are. You stop being apologetic because you have this backing of gold, or as we should say, of God, that you know you're safe. No need to be jealous for anyone or insecure about anything, because your value does not come from that. Okay? He says, and are strengthened by it, and they experience God's blessing in all that they do. Do you know this is the secret for you becoming everything that you want to be? For succeeding in your career, in your dreams, in your passion, in your music, in your acting, in your writing books? It's the consciousness, the identity of who you are and whose you are. That your value doesn't change, that you are created for a purpose. Do you understand? It says those experience God's blessing in all that they do. The things that we do that fail, sometimes we are not conscious of our value and we leave it to chance. It says if someone believes they have a relationship with God but fails to guard his words. How many times have we talked about the power of words? Many times. That it comes as you become conscious. You guard your words. You don't just say anything. You don't call yourself anything. Because you understand whose you are. You understand that you are valuable. You carry yourself as valuable. He says here that because they believe, if someone believes they have a relationship with God but fails to guard his words, then his heart is drifting away. You'll always know the state of your heart by the words that you speak concerning yourself. If you're putting yourself down, that's where your heart is. You understand? If you're cursing yourself, if you're looking down on yourself, that's exactly the state of your heart. So how do you change that? Say the right thing. Say what the Word of God says about you. You don't even need to be creative. You just need to look into the Word and say, I'm fearfully and wonderfully made. Do you understand? Okay, we are done now. I literally are just finishing this line. And it says here, if someone believes that they have a relation and fails to guard his word, then his heart is drifting away and his religion is shallow and empty. Wow. And he says true spirituality that is pure in the eyes of God is to make a difference. He says in the lives of orphans, widows, in their troubles, and to refuse to be corrupted by the world's values. And that's why it says in Romans 12, it says, be transformed by the renewing of your mind, that you may be able to prove what is the good, perfect, and acceptable will of God. This is your reasonable act of service. Okay? Are we good up to there? Think that's a good foundation for identity? Say I if you think so. Say I for ID. All right. There's another part, but we don't have time. But I feel like this was such a good foundation. Skip to the next one, just to show you. I want us to have a conversation on Gideon because his conversation here really speaks to the identity crisis that we most feel when we look for solutions outside ourselves. We say, oh, maybe they can do it. Maybe they can do it. But you can do it. In fact, you are made to do it, as this passage will show us. I'm going to pray for us now as we conclude. Thank you for sitting patiently.